So welcome to the Chess Scholar channel. Please may I ask if you enjoyed this video to please subscribe. Today we're looking at a very instructive endgame that was in the recent qualifiers for the Airthings Masters. It was between our ever favourite Ginger GM Simon Williams and Vladimir Malakhov, who has a real history in rapid chess. He had over 2770 FIDE rapid rating in his peak, so a very strong player. This was 10 minutes plus 2 seconds of increment. The game started out in a Sicilian defense, and we're going to carry on here from move 37, where we've got 3 pawns versus 2 on the king side. Williams is playing black, so we're going to look from his perspective, and we've got 2 pawns versus 3 on the queen side. Obviously we'd probably take black here because you've got the bishop over the knight, but a completely even game. So we're going to run through a few moves, but there's a couple of really instructive moments throughout. So we get knight to d2, g5, knight c4, e6, a5, g4, and f takes to g4. So Williams now has the majority on this side, so ultimately what he wants to try and do is hopefully get this pawn here on the g file, because he's got the dark square bishop. If he can stay along here, that means he can support it being promoted later in the endgame. So we see Malakhov thinking, right, what can I do? Malakhov's clearly thinking, he goes e3, then we get bishop to e5, we get king f2, bishop c3, and Malakhov is seeing, well, this h5 pawn is weak, so is there a way I can attack it? Well, yes, there is, if you can get your knight into the f4 square. And that's what he does. He goes for knight g2, king f5, and knight f4, attacking this pawn. And that means if he can just stay here, that means he can tie down the king for the rest of the endgame if he doesn't want to lose this pawn, because if he doesn't stay to protect it, he will lose it, which means we can try and infiltrate over here and get a 2-1 majority on this side of the board game. So, but Williams, according to the engine, is +2 here. And we get bishop to d4 check, we get king f1, and then we lose the advantage for black with h4, because h4 actually quite interestingly ends up losing Williams these 2 pawns are over here. So we might ask ourselves, how is that possible? Well, what happens is we get, first of all, knight to e2. So Malakhov is thinking, well, first of all, if I can get this pawn, well then, obviously with a knight, this is the perfect jump. So how can I get here? Well, there's an old Farkiruni, as we call it, here on the d4 square. So he has to attack the bishop. Bishop moves, best move to f6, protecting the pawn. If it does get taken, you can take back. And that's what Malakhov does to deflect the bishop, which then allows him to check Williams. So Williams moves up to king e4, and then we get knight c6. So he's got an attack on the pawn here. Now this is very instructive, because as Williams goes to e3. Now e3 is a blunder, because e3 allows Malakhov just take this pawn for free. But the interesting thing is if Williams went king f3, Malakhov can no longer take this pawn, because he can't stop this pawn from being promoted. And so that's what the fascinating thing is. High level chess, it's all about tempos. You go directly here, you can no longer take here. And what that ends up happening is Williams makes a blunder, loses the pawn, then goes here, but that extra tempo means that Malakhov can get back in time. Now obviously Williams wants to get on this diagonal somewhere so he can support the promotion of this pawn. So Malakhov, obviously with his knight, is now blocking this square, so Williams is going to have to think of how can he get around this. So we get a5, we get the pawn push g3, a6, g2, g1, And would you believe we've got mate and 4 on the board. Now Williams misses this. You got to keep in mind it's a 2-second increment in a 10-minute game, and Williams has 25 seconds at this time. And in between he's drinking beer, so you can't criticize him for not seeing it. So the tactical misses here. He should have gone king to g3. Best move after that is knight to e5 is to give up because of the diag. And then we've got knight into mate into, we got c3 here, and then ultimately b4, and you're just going to go back here, and it's all over, red all over, as we would say. So let's go back to what happened with g5. The idea, of course, is that Williams wants to get to here, but brilliantly, with it no longer being protected, this square, the knight jumps in and checks Williams. Williams goes to g3 now, and Malakhov would have won the game from here if he had jumped into e2, but instead he goes to f5, which is a mistake, allowing Williams with the great move to h3. Then we get a7. Now, obviously, all Williams has to do is get a check, get his bishop protected somewhere on this diagonal. If I could actually highlight the squares, that would be great. So we get a7. Williams comes back here with the idea to go to b6, check the king, and it's game over. So currently Malakhov is blocking here and here, and we see the wonderful promotion by Malakhov to a knight. So now with that, Malakhov is protecting all of these squares apart from this one here. So Williams now has to look for a way to get onto this diagonal. Problem is he can't go here to get onto that diagonal. So instead he goes to f6, we get king f2, we get e5, knight e3, and this is the losing move here because this allows Williams to be able to pin the knight to the king. And of course if you take the knight, the king can't move, the king has to move, but it's protecting, so if you take, this pawn promotes, and ultimately that's what happens. Malakhov plays knight up, Williams gets the bishop off, and then we've got queen versus king with knight and 2. Malakhov attacks it, but the game could have been won here. Well, Williams doesn't see the fork, which would have gotten a free knight. Instead, if he goes check, knight comes in, attacks the queen with the pawn, pushes again, and then Williams just gets himself into a position where here he makes a mistake, because once you get queen check here, the king can no longer protect the knight, and so when the king goes back, take, and this pawn is gone, and Malakhov loses the game. But I'm sure you'd agree, very instructive in-game, very balanced in-game, but a lot to learn, and hopefully you've taken away a few little pointers there. Certainly worth revisiting that game yourself and looking over some very instructive things. So thank you very much for watching.